Welcome, folks, to another episode of Mormon Discussion Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Reel, and I'm grateful to be joined by my former co-host. I hope at some point co-host at least once in a while, Britt Hartley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy. I'm so excited to be with you, Bill. It's like riding a bike. It's just like coming home to be able to sit with you today.
Good, good. I want to say, folks, first off, I know Britt Hartley. I've known her for years. I think she is intelligent, articulate. She has a ton of life experience. So when I got her book, I had high expectations. I was expecting a lot from it. And when I opened it up, I was impressed above and beyond the expectations I had. I messaged you today and said, Britt Hartley, what you've done is incredible. And I said other things, but essentially to say you have put out a product that um, far surpasses what I have sensed is the sort of standard for a good book in this space. And I've read about half the book throughout all the chapters, but I sort of skimmed and then read certain paragraphs. I think folks will be able to see from some of these questions today that you hit it out of the park with this. And I just want to, on the front end, say, man, incredible job, well done.
Thank you so much, Bill. That means a lot coming from you because you've read a lot of books in this space, so that really means a lot. And I had someone the other day say, "Britt Hartley, where did you come from? You're an overnight success." And I said, "I'm not an overnight success. I messaged Bill Reel was the first time." Oh, I think it's over a decade now, Bill, if we look
Mhm.
back at it. I
12
think we're
years.
at over a decade,
Mhm.
of when I reached out to Bill, and that was the first time I voiced publicly my thoughts, and we were still approaching religion with faith to try to whatever we were still trying to rescue the baby in the bathwater and stay in religion, and we had been talking through the years, and then the past 2 years, I've been practicing these messages and these ideas in our conversations on the Almost Awakened podcast, which I still refer many people to. Some of the podcasts that we've done, I still refer to clients or refer to people asking me about more information on something. And so we've been in a long-term conversation about a lot of these topics. And so I wrote in the back of the book, I don't know if you've gone back there, but in my special thanks, one of those names was Bill Reel, who I've been able to practice these ideas with over the years, and our friendship is just so meaningful to me. This conversation, some of these things we've even talked about on the podcast before, and I'm just so grateful to you. And I'm so grateful that you uh, a few years ago opened up Mormon discussions to female voices because you wanted more female voices on the platform. And if that hadn't have happened, if you hadn't have done that, I don't think that I'd be where I am now publishing a book. And so Mormon discussions has been an integral part of what I've been able to do, kind of now running my own brand and running my own content. And so I've made a donation to Mormon discussion, and I hope you all too, because this has been an integral part of my journey. And I hope people can value it like I value it too.
Man, thank you. Thank you. Um, you and I first talked to each other in 2012. So it has been almost 12 years, 11 and a half years since we first communicated in the midst of both of us going through a Mormon faith crisis and beginning to sense that things didn't add up and trying like hell to put it back together. And this book, folks, Britt Hartley's No Nonsense Spirituality, let me put it in front of the camera there. No Nonsense Spirituality, all the tools, no faith required. Let's jump into it. So that I've got a bunch of questions. We'll see how far we get.
Yeah.
We've got about 2 hours time to dive into this, maybe an hour and 50 minutes. So let's start with this. I wouldn't be me if I didn't ask at least one sexual question. So we're going to start off with that. Then we'll get into the some of these spiritual points. But in the very beginning, you tell a little bit of your story, and one of the things you mentioned is that you are kicked out of your home because you had sex as a teenager. And it strikes me, again, all these conversations we've had in this space, it strikes me that we humans, Homo sapiens, and then let's say before that, we're Homo erectus and Neanderthals and Denisovans and whatever else we were before we were this. We have been reproducing as a life species since the beginning of time. And it came long before our ability to tell stories about sex, to have shame about sex, and yet you are in a home where as a teenager, you do a thing that on some level, we all get that there's, some lack of full responsibility for that decision. I don't mean like in free will. I mean, it's not the best choice in the world for teenagers to go around having sex. They don't possibly comprehend all of the, repercussions of that. But kicking you out of the home is an extreme step, and it comes from people in systems who decide that somehow these things have to be handled in a way that often is extreme.
Mhm.
A moment about getting kicked out of your house and how, man, it seems like the book seems to indicate. I've heard you say it before. Tell me about like how difficult that was to have people you love go, "Hey, sorry, but this thing you did makes you not worthy to be here."
Yeah, so if I think back at that time, and this is a long time ago, I felt like I was two selves. So I was Mormon me and had, you know, all of those expectations and played that part when I needed to, and I wanted to be a good girl and I wanted to please my parents. And then I had this other self that was not, that had a lot of doubt, that had a lot of teenage angst, that was questioning the For Strength of Youth pamphlet, that had this boyfriend, and he was the first kind of intellectually leaning person that I had met where we could talk about life, talk about ideas. And when you're 16, that's incredibly powerful to like find the it's your first love, right? So it's really powerful. And we had a long-term relationship for that time. And they were just kind of two selves and kind of battling each other. And I almost felt like I was becoming two different people. Because there was just so much shame around all of it, but they were both somehow still part of me. And I do think that if at that time I had a parent who had educated me on sex and relationships and had that be integrated so that I could be one person, I could have navigated that sexual experience much more healthy. But because of all the shame and repression, it was unprotected sex. And and like multiple times of unprotected sex, like really at risk for a teenage pregnancy. Looking back, it's quite horrifying to think about. Like my life could have really, really changed in some negative ways, but because of luck, that didn't happen. Um, and so it really it was unprotected sex, and I really regret kind of, you know, that aspect of it. But it was because I had to be these two different selves, and I couldn't be a healthy integrated self. And then it also sent me on this journey of how do I reconcile back with my family, and then I became a nuanced Mormon. And because that helped, okay, there's enough good things in nuanced Mormonism that I can stay Mormon, and then that heals the wound of being kicked out of your home and being a little girl without your family facing the world. That was such a traumatic experience. So it affected me for years and years and years, and every time I lost faith in something or I had to change kind of my belief system, it wasn't until I went into therapy and spiritual direction that someone said, every time your faith crumbles, and you have to adjust it, the reason it's so hard for you is because you're a 15-year-old girl again, you know, by yourself in the universe. And I don't think you fully faced that. So at 35, I had to go back and face some of that. So it was a really traumatic experience. Now, saying that, I have excellent relationships with both my mother and father. That wound feels very healed for me, but it's definitely something that all of us look back and say, wow, religion really set us up to fail in how we approach this situation in a way that hurt everyone.
Yeah, yeah, um and sorry, I do have my puppy and I have to watch him, so he will bark a few times, folks. Um, I just find it interesting that people inside systems are taught narratives about sexuality and about what shame should be attributed to it, rather than just going like, "Here's healthy, here's unhealthy, here's responsible, here's irresponsible, here's the various degrees of that, here are healthy ways to help someone with that." Instead, we sort of go, "Nope, the system teaches me that this is the amount of shame I should apply to this facet of humanity," when that facet of humanity existed long before the shame in the story that we told about it. And so I appreciate your thoughts there. I want to talk to you for a moment. There's a quote you have early on. By the way, there are numerous quotes in this book, folks, that are just brilliant. Here's one. I'm not embarrassed by my anger. Anger is how you reclaim boundaries. I thought that was really powerful. Talk for a moment about how anger isn't something to be embarrassed about. It's a normal human thing that we all should be safe to feel within certain boundaries, but that anger itself is a way to reclaim boundaries.
Yeah, it's something that would have helped me earlier on, which is that, upon leaving religion, the most healthy thing that you can do is be really fucking angry. And nobody told me that, and nobody in the spiritual space, because a lot of times in the spiritual space, you get a lot of zen and you get a lot of like, I'm so calm and I'm so at peace. And so you, even outside of religion, you sometimes will get the shame that anger is a bad emotion and that really enlightened people don't feel anger. And so it was really eye-opening to me and really healing for me when I realized and when I got some education that the healthiest thing that I could do upon leaving a high demand religion was to be really angry, because anger happens every time there's a boundary violation. And it's kind of the forest fire that burns things away that shouldn't have been there. And I'm not a convert like you, Bill, so I've been in this, system for a long time. And so how many boundary violations did I have over the course of 2 decades? And that is the most healthy and even the most spiritual thing for you to do. And I had never heard that before, in religion or in the spirituality world. And so leaning into the anger in healthy ways, that doesn't mean like burn every bridge in my life, but in healthy ways, leaning into the anger was really healing for me, and a really important part of the process that you can't skip. Whenever I get a client who says, I'm so angry, how can I skip to the I've made peace with this phase? And it's like, we're going to have to be angry for longer. Let's dig into it. Let's get more angry. Let's get some anger into our bodies. Let's get some rituals around anger so that we can process this feeling and lean into it, because anger happens when there's a boundary violation. And then as someone was born and raised in the Mormon church, there's a lot of boundary violations, and that's a forest fire that needs to run its course before you get all the benefits of the new life and the new growth. And so actually not holding back the anger actually was the thing that helped me to process the anger phase, which I think is a very healthy and
Yeah.
important phase and shouldn't be shamed.
When you're in a high demand fundamentalist religion, the religion tells you what you grow up with is a story that all of these boundary violations are not only not boundary violations, they are they're allowed, they're welcomed. You need to permit us to do these. These are the things that we're allowed to do, and God wants us to do these things to you. For instance, having a 7-year-old kid getting ready for baptism sit in a room with a stranger man and be asked questions about whether they live the law of chastity or not. Um, that seems so innocent to the insider believer. And on the outside, you recognize that nowhere ever should a 7-year-old child be sitting with a lay leader who's a stranger. That lay leader is during the week, they're working in some other profession, and someone else has decided that God's told them that this person should be in the room with them. And then that person has free reign to ask whatever questions they want.
Or even just as a woman, that I was so in the system that I didn't even have a red flag when a man who was not my husband asked me about my underwear. And me having to explain, hey, sometimes when I'm on my period, I don't wear my garments because I feel like I have to be honest. And now I'm talking about to this strange man about my underwear and my periods, and like I didn't even have a red flag. Like there's some things in Mormonism where I had a red flag. There's some things in the temple where like, oh, I can tell, something popped up there for me. But the interesting thing is that there will be things, if you've been raised in a religion where you're so in it, it's just water to you, that you don't even have a red flag. And so the most appropriate response is anger. I was so in this that I didn't even realize that it wasn't okay for this man to be talking to me about my underwear and my
Yeah,
periods.
and you mentioned it too, on the outside of religion, again, we did, multiple episodes, 12 of them, I believe, when we talked about Jack Kornfield's book, Buddhism for Beginners, and the Buddhist idea is that, "Oh, you got anger? Like, notice that. Just sit with that for a moment and notice it."
Mm,
And that almost violates my need sometimes to just let me be angry. Like, I don't wanna sit and get outside of ego and just be aware of it. I wanna be ego for a moment and feel some anger about
mm,
something that's happened. So I appreciate that you drew attention to that as well, that sometimes no nonsense spirituality also is going to rise above and beyond what wokeness would suggest as well. Um,
mm,
I wanna point out here, page 10, of the book, No Nonsense Spirituality by Britt Hartley. On page 10, you've got a quote at the bottom. You say, "My most dangerous thought during this period of feeling lost in a drift was that there is no inherent meaning in the universe and no reason to be alive. This included the feelings of desperation that evolution is pulling the strings and that life is a system of inherent violence. For even as a vegan, you have to kill conscious life to survive. Therefore, I worried that perhaps the most moral thing one could do is withdraw consent to life itself, not to perpetuate a system of suffering that we did not choose to opt into." And beautiful quote. It speaks to the idea that you realize that life will require you to harm others even on your best effort, that you'll have to harm other humans, you'll have to harm other life forms, and that maybe the most moral choice is to only harm yourself, hence being able to drop out of this universe process whereby you're going to have to harm other things. I want you to speak for a moment about that sort of, it's really an intellectual thought. It's not despair for despair's sake. It's really an intellectual thought that goes, "Hey, there's a weight of merit to these ideas, and the most merited idea is maybe to just step away."
mm.
Maybe speak about whatever comes up for you there.
Yeah, that wasn't a thought that I just had for, like, a week, and then I moved on to
Yeah.
other things. Like, I got stuck in the feeling of that thought, but also the logic of that thought. Like, there's it's not completely illogical. Like, to me, that's not an insane thought. And when you look at philosophy, especially the philosophers who write about nihilism, I mean it's Camus who writes that suicide is the first question of philosophy. It is, do you consent to life? Do you consent to life as it is? And to me, that was not an easy question. That was a very difficult question. And for a while, I think, like, this is an honest space. You and I have a long-term relationship of this being an honest space. If it hadn't been for my children, I may have succumbed to the end of that thought. Um, but what shifted for me is this idea of interconnection, and that I didn't want to become the monster that I was trying to escape. So if you are worried about there being suffering in the world, and you're worried about the morality of that, and you even have some unaliving thoughts around that, what changed it for me is realizing that if I did that, it spreads so much suffering into the world, not just my children, but my friends and my family, and the part of the world that I can now, like, the part of the world that I could have made better. Like, you also lose potentiality of the part of the world, your gift and your voice that could have made the world better. And so if I escape because life is suffering, I add more suffering to the system. And when I do that, I become the very monster I'm trying to escape. And so once I got there, I realized really the only thing that I can do is to find ways to decrease suffering in myself and around me as best I can. That there is no, I'm not an island. I'm not, and if you feel like you're an island, it's an illusion of depression. It's an illusion of the lens of depression. We are far too interconnected for someone's life to not matter to someone, for someone's potential to not matter, for someone's voice to not matter. We're far too interconnected for that, even just genetically, or even um, just in our stories. So once I got there, I started to say, okay, well, how do I improve my life as such that it's not suffering? And this is what Jim Carrey talks about. Whenever Jim Carrey talks about depression, I know that he's been to some nihilism, because he'll say things like, for me, this is Jim Carrey speaking. He'll say, for me, depression wasn't because I wasn't getting enough sunshine. It was because my body is tired of the character that I'm having to play. And so I started saying, okay, if I'm tired of this character, if the life that I have now is one where I suffer and I'm not happy, what would be the kind of life that would be worth just experiencing? What are the people and the projects and the things and the experiences that would be sandcastles worth building, right? Even if it is ultimately meaningless. And when I made that shift, because I was already willing to unalive myself, which is it's a big move. What if I made one move smaller than that, which is take big risks into that authentic life, big risks into authenticity. And once I did that, my life really transformed to the point now where I don't have depression, I don't have suicidality. I genuinely enjoy the life that I'm living, even knowing that I'm going to die, even knowing that there's suffering, even knowing that that for life I try to reduce suffering as much as I can in the food choices I'm able to make, but also submitting to the idea that there's an inherent part of suffering, and I'm going to suffer, and I'm going to be hurt, and I'm going to be sick, and I'm going to die, and my molecules are going to be used by other things, and that we're all part of this. But there's a magic to it now that I didn't have before, that it's still worth, even with that, it's still worth popping your head up in the universe and checking things out and having some experiences. It's still worth it.
That line of thinking, it's only a hop, jump, and a skip to the idea that not is having children is not a moral choice, because you're bringing a life form into the world. It's a crapshoot about how much suffering they're going to have, but inevitably they'll have some degree of suffering. And for some people brought into the world, it will be a mass amount of suffering. Now, in your case, I know that you have adopted children. That to me is a very different thing. Those children are already there, and you brought them in, and you're like, "Hey, I'm going to give you a better uh, space than what you currently have, or what many of the outlooks look like for you." But maybe do you have any thoughts there? If I could maybe push
Yeah,
you to sort of one of those ideas,
absolutely.
yeah. What do you think
We
about
should have
having
done a
children?
we should have done a podcast on antinatalism. That would be a really interesting podcast to do. So antinatalism is this idea that it is unethical to bring life into the world because of the suffering. And I will say, when I was in the dark space, I would have called myself an antinatalist at that time, because my life was suffering. I had very deep depression. Like, the nihilism was fueling the depression, which is fueling the nihilism. It's this spiral until you get into a very deep and dark place. Uh, and so in that place, I definitely would have said it's unethical to have children. For me, that I had already adopted children by then, so I had already considered the ethics of having children. So I decided to have one child because of my fertility issues. I had spent so much money and time to bring that child into the world. It felt unethical to spend that much time and money to have my own biological child when there were so many children in need of a home. And so that ethical decision for me had started earlier than my nihilism, and I had already at that point chosen to adopt children, because I because of the ethics, not just in bringing a child into the world. I don't think I was really thinking about that yet, because I wasn't in my nihilism, but I was already thinking, like, I don't know if I can ethically support this idea of spending another, it was like $100,000, all the in vitro fertilization processes I did to just have my own biological child. I don't think I can ethically support that. So I chose to adopt children, and then during my nihilism phase, I was definitely an antinatalist, because when you're in that place and you're suffering so much, your lens of the world, which I didn't realize at first, because I just felt like I was looking at the world logically. But of course, we always have a bias. And in my depression bias, it seemed like there was too much suffering to really justify life. Now I'm in a place where, because I'm not under that lens, I think that it can be ethical to bring children into the world if you're in a place where I'm in an emotional and financial and spiritual and whatever place that my life is pretty good, and I think that I'd be able to offer the incredible lottery of being able to exist, and I have some tools, and where I'd be able to help offer that to another to another life, to be able to experience life. I don't think that that's unethical when you're really thinking about it and feel like you have tools to be able to support the suffering of what it is to be a human. Now, I do think it is unethical when you have children because you want something to love you, right? And some of these other reasons, or you want to have 10 children because you want to have a legacy because you're afraid of death. I mean, there's all these subconscious reasons why we have children. I think a lot of those are unethical, but if you are in a place where you're kind of aware of the ethics of it and you're doing it mindfully, and you know that you have some tools to be able to, as best you can, hope to that child would be glad that it was born, I don't think that that is necessarily unethical.
Yeah.
What do you
Um,
think? What do you any
um,
thought Yeah, what do you think about all
I
that?
think almost so because the system encourages us to get married moderately young and religion asks us to get married extremely young, I think that almost always having children is either something that sort of just happens because it's part of the process, what we've been told to do, or it is what you said in the latter stages of that response, which is I want something to take care of. I want something to give me feedback that I'm loved. I want something, and I think most instances of people having children falls into one of those camps, and not the camp of, hey, I'm 30 years old and our family makes a really good income and we can provide a really good life for this person and really give this human being a lot of opportunities and a lot of joyful experiences. I just don't think that's what anyone's thinking about for the majority of
No.
children born.
I mean,
So
for my biological child, if I had to look back and say, "Why did I have that child?" It was like, because I was supposed to, because not having that child, I felt very unrighteous. I felt like, why is God blessing everybody else with children and I'm supposed to be a mother and God's punishing me? Like, I had all these thoughts around it that were not necessarily thinking about the actual ethics of bringing something into the world. So I'm not saying that like I'm so ethical, like that's why I had my first child. But I when we're talking about the ethics of it, I think that there are, ethical and unethical reasons to bring a child into the world when you are aware of, you're not being dictated by religions or culture or things like that.
yeah. A few pages later, you mentioned that religion might be the greatest tool helping us into what you call third spaces. And you say, okay, there's
Mhm.
work, there's home, and then there's these third sort of realm that we go into, which is sort of community. And we get ourselves outside of our house, we get ourselves away from work, and we interact with the world at large. And that religion might be the best tool to take us into those spaces. Maybe speak for a moment about the importance of third spaces and what it is that religion, amidst all of its unhealthiness, what is religion trying to do that actually is beneficial for humans there?
Yeah, this is really there are some critiques of secularism that I think are unfair, or atheism that are unfair, like saying that Stalin is an atheist, that's what all atheist countries are going to go to. I think that's just a bad argument. That's much more like a religion than it is a secular society. But some arguments I think are fair, and I think one of the most compelling arguments, and you see this really all over YouTube in debates. I feel like debates between Christians and atheists now are not about if the religion is true. It's all turned into, is religion useful? Is it useful for society? And is it too useful to let go of? I think that's where the conversation has gone. So, this argument for religion is that because there's a shared myth, it brings people and resources and money and time together in a way that creates communities. And those communities are really beneficial. And there's some evidence that says that religion is good for your well-being. If you, over COVID, for example, if you had religious belief in a religious community, you tended to fare better. They still continue to care for each other even during COVID and check in on each other. So if we know that community is so important for our longevity, for our quality of life, for raising children, for children to have multiple mentors, for moral education, um, religion is doing, it's carrying so much things that are actually good for you and your well-being, where you can walk into a building and get a lot of these tools and not have to be a professional philosopher trying to figure out how to what religion is doing for you psychologically and socially and trying to replace it all. I mean, I was lucky that I was able to make that my part-time job figuring that out. But for many people, the best thing for you to do as far as well-being is to walk into a church. And that's hard sometimes for the ex-Christian, ex-Mormon, ex-religious space to hear, but there is some data for that we have to take seriously. And it's a problem of secularism, and this is where you get a lot of Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. It's a problem for secularism that because there is no shared myth, there's really nothing bringing people together. You can call yourself a humanist. There's a humanist association in Idaho. Have I ever been to a gathering? Are there humanist lessons for my children? No, none of that exists. There's not enough stickiness to get people involved, to get people to form a community. And it is a weakness of secularism. Now, my approach says, yes, that's a problem, but individuals can create their own life and their own community and their own individuals can do this. We may not have something as big as the Catholic Church for secularism. Maybe that never exists because we don't have a sticky enough shared myth. But I do think that if we know that this is good for you, here's some tools maybe to help you build that on your own. So I think it's going to be much more of an individual game than something like Thrive or Oasis taking over the world and becoming the next Catholic Church or Mormon Church. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, yeah. On page 30 and 31, and I got to set up. This is one of my favorite quotes, and it's actually on two different pages. I put them together, but I want to set it up with the first sentence on page 30. Secular spirituality is an approach that gathers the wisdom and tools in religion, the intuitive space of the occult, in the preeminence of science to create a path that uses the benefits of all three stances. And then here's the quote. As a secular spiritualist, one is free to play in holy text, celebrate Christmas, hang out with the mystics, meditate, do a tarot reading for fun with friends, visit holy temples, explore rituals, dabble in psychedelics, or gather wisdom from wherever it comes. It's the approach that gives you the most liberty to explore any and all of these spaces without becoming a robot to the dogmas that demand your attention, money, time, and allegiance. It's the best of all three worlds because you never have to turn off your brain or leave the realm of science, but you also have access to the tools that religion has been a vessel for. And then on page 31, to finish that off, it says secular spirituality means the freedom to work with the most number of tools for the least amount of downsides. It's an approach that is open to all the tools of spirituality for mental and communal health without a requirement of faith. And I think you nailed it there. That's such a beautiful explanation. It's how I feel. I am free within, constraints of the law, within constraints of not hurting people, but I am free in my authentic self to explore the world to whatever degree opportunity presents itself. And I don't have to feel any more. I don't have to feel any pressure from the world or the systems to any sort of significant degree to compromise myself and have my exploration of my inner and outer world follow any certain kinds of rules or guidelines that others have told me is the right path for everyone. I get to do it my way. And it has been such a freeing experience and beneficial one. And I have had more experiences, and we'll get to this later when we talk about awe. And I think transcendence and I forget the other word you used in that, but awe and contemplation, I think. Let me just double check here. I want to make sure I say the right things.
I don't even remember, so you'll have to tell me.
Let's see here.
Chapter 5.
Awe and contemplation. Yeah. And I feel more experiences with awe in the deconstructed state of practicing some form of secular individual spirituality. The last 8 years of my life have been amazing in that regard. And it's because I finally felt free to take on my own path on this.
Mhm.
Um, your thoughts on how important it is for people to sense this is really their journey. Whatever secular spirituality is, they're the ones who get to define it. Some people may say, I'll never read tarot cards. That's not interesting. But I'm going to take a walk in my local park every day and contemplate nature. And the ability of people to choose their own path. Maybe speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, I think this is actually where there's some benefit to being an ex-Mormon versus an ex of something else, is because we've been burned by religion, because we have been told what to do, because we have been drawn in by prophet worship and all these things. I actually find it to be a benefit because then I can play in all these spaces and be aware of when that's happening and stay kind of on the safe end of the cult spectrum. So you and I have both, a mutual friend that really loves crystals, and we'll go walk in. I just sent this guy something, and we'll walk in, and you and I have played like, pick up this crystal. What do you like? And you and I are will just open-mindedly go play in that space. Why the hell not? And yet we also don't become the kind of crystal person where I have to charge my crystal into the moonlight, and then if I hold it, then I get on this frequency, and then the universe gets to send me, I mean, really prosperity gospel you can get with the crystals, and then you're back into another religion where you're doing spiritual bypassing, where you're using these tools to be able to cope with life rather than facing the fears directly. To me, the best freedom is I can go into any of these spaces, any of these spiritual spaces, and get the tool, get the benefit, be able to play, be able to explore, and not be sucked into another Mormonism that causes damage both individually and to the world. And that to me is a benefit of ex Mormonism, because we get to see how the sausage gets made in this religion more so than you would in Christianity. We just know more about Joseph Smith than we do Jesus. And so because of that, we get to see how this happens, how this process happens where we give away our agency and we start to follow people. And so it's Sam Harris who said that nobody is more ardent in their atheism than ex-Mormons. And I think the ex-Mormon world like had a collective orgasm when he said that, because it's like, oh, Sam Harris recognizes us. But it is a benefit of Mormonism. I think it keeps you on guard for the religious brain and how that happens, so that you can in the future have the freedom to play in these spaces and gather the tools, real tools that help your life to be better, without getting sucked into another cult.
Yeah. At every chapter you wrote, at the very beginning, there's an interesting quote from some philosopher or whatnot. And in chapter 3, Order and Chaos, you have a quote from Carl Jung. In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. In all caprice, a fixed law, and for everything that works is grounded on its opposite. I want you to do two things. One, I want you to share maybe your thoughts on what that quote means to you. But then I also want you to maybe speak specifically about the secret order. Like it is chaos and it is disorder and shit could fly off the rails at any given moment. Um, we like to think we have control. We try to create worlds around us. We humans stepped off of the food chain. We created worlds where we could have some degree of safety and control, and it's all an illusion. That's not real. And there is some order in the disorder, and Jung says it's a disorder or a secret order. Maybe speak about the quote in general, and then what do you think he means by secret order?
Yeah, so Carl Jung was really helpful for this section for me. He really, I think more than everyone else, and I don't agree with everything that he says, but really he explored this idea of shadow, and that where there is light there is shadow, and really push the boundaries forward on doing shadow work and integrating the shadow that I found helpful. Um, and he was really into this concept of chaos and order conceptually, and this idea of yin yang, and how if we it just kind of happens intuitively. And he would use the collective unconscious to explain this, that when we get too far on one side, intuitively the other side starts to kind of pop up, because we have this desire to be balanced. um, and so if a for example, if he were to be looking at religion today, he would say, absolutely, there's a feminist rising and a rising of the occult, because we've been so masculine and so hierarchical in religion for the past however thousand years, that of course there's going to be a rise of the feminine. That's a natural collective unconscious thing for us to do. And I just find that a really interesting idea. And the reason that I developed a chapter on it, which isn't specific to Jung entirely, but I wanted to outline this idea of spirituality looks different based on whether you're coming from chaos or coming from order. And that is really important, because it would have saved me a shit ton of time when I was trying to figure out my life. Because you have if you're too ordered, it's suffocating. It's not good for you. You're very repressed. And we all know what that's like. If you come from a high demand religion, you can feel that box and you can feel that it's suffocating you and killing you. But too much chaos is paralyzing. It's the opposite. It's the problems of the opposite side of the coin. Too much freedom actually is paralyzing. Too many choices is paralyzing. And then you'll just lay on the couch because there's so many choices that you essentially can't do anything. And so there are different spiritual tools based on whether you need to order your chaos or chaos your order. So if we're chaosing the order, we call that deconstruction. And there are many helpful tools in deconstruction. But some of the things, but what I didn't realize, so I learned this the hard way, is that there were times where I was needing to build order because I was in too much chaos and nihilism. And then I was trying to do things like dissolve the ego, or do these things that open up more deconstruction and chaos. And I'm like, I don't need any more deconstruction. I am like totally dissociated, living in an illusion in Truman, in the Truman Show. I don't need any of this deconstruction right now. I need to be able to put my feet on some ground here. And so being able to figure out where you are on that spectrum and the spiritual tools for each side would have been really helpful for me. I wish someone would have said, like, hey, stop doing these guided meditations where you're dissolving the ego. You're kind of already psychologically unhinged. Maybe we need to like build some of this up actually, because you are not in a great place. That would have helped me a lot. So as humans, we just seem to do best when we're balanced in between order and chaos. Where that is for each person is very individual, but it's where we do best. For whatever reason, our nervous system functions best when we have some order and structure and safety and room to grow. That is where our brain and bodies say, I'm in a good groove. And so, spiritually, because this is part of your spiritual journey, I wanted to outline, hey, your approach to this depends on where you are. So if you are reconstructing, you don't need these deconstruction tools right now. Like you don't, those are tools for the other side. And if you are deconstructing, you need to rip some things apart before maybe you do some of these reconstructing things. So it was just really helpful for me. And I think the reason that I wrote it in the book is because I think it would have helped me at that phase when I had too much chaos and didn't know why the deconstruction tools weren't working for me anymore.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Um, there's a quote that says, "One of the most powerful experiences I had during deconstruction was when over a decade ago now, a new friend told me I wasn't broken. I was growing. How do you know you're growing? It feels like dying." And it made me think way back, and I think you'll remember this, but there was a point in the podcast of Mormon discussion where I covered John Pauline's stages of faith. And again, there are all these stages of faith models. And the first one that I think all of us in Mormonism encountered a decade ago was Fowler's stages of faith. And it was really all we had. but it really didn't go very far. It sort of stayed sort of with religion. And then there were other ones. Perry's scheme of cognitive dissonance, I think, is what that's called. Uh, but John Pauline was a minister who wrote out, sort of took Fowler stages of faith and expanded them. Now, today we've got Ken Wilber and spiral dynamics and all these other models. But when John Pauline described the dark night of the soul, and he spends like a page and a half talking about it, and I just remember going, when I read it the very first time, I remember going, oh, this is supposed to be horrific. This is supposed to hurt a lot. Um, Speak for a moment about, because folks are out there that are just beginning the deconstruction, and they're sensing that this is going to be a really hard, horrific thing. And to put it as, if you want to grow, if you want to experience growth, it's going to feel like dying. And that's a good way to put it. What do you think about that, Britt?
Yeah, so the first part of that was you. So that friend is you, Bill Real, that you were and I've told this on the podcast multiple times if you're an almost awakened listener, that the first person in my life to tell me that I wasn't broken, I was growing, was Bill Real. And it was the start of a really beautiful friendship for us. And the second part of that is something that I realized later on, is that, I wasn't done with that, that every time that I grew, it felt like I was dying, because there's an identity that died each step along the way. So there's a Mormon that died, and there's a part of me who believed in God and felt like there was eternal justice and meaning. And when that died, then I died. And then when truth died, I died again. So I've died many times. Um, and and all of that, looking back, is growth. And the funny thing is, it's in all of our stories. All of our stories, the character like dies. There's a phoenix. There's a terrible thing that happens, right? And then somehow subconsciously we all think, I'm not gonna, but like, I'll grow, but I'm not gonna like die. Like, it's not gonna be that hard. And then when it happens, it almost surprises us. And it seems so silly. Like I've been surrounded by stories where characters die and come back to life in some interesting way since I was a child. And yet it still surprised me when I'm like, I'm dying. Why is that? Why should that have been a surprise for me? But for whatever reason, it was. And now, because I'm a little bit more healthy with my ego, I can die and be reborn a little bit more gracefully and easily, because I've experienced some ego deaths, and I'm more comfortable with the process, and I'm less clinging to my identity. But to get there had multiple deaths. And it shouldn't have been a surprise, but for whatever reason, it was a surprise for me. And I'm so grateful that in those early stages that you were talking about some of these models that showed that growth, that this pain was good, and that it meant that you were growing, because that was the first time. I think you were the first person in my life who was talking about Fowler stages of faith, because what religion does is says, oh, this is hard, and that this feels like this doubt and this growth, it feels hard and it feels like you're dying. So come back to the security blanket, come back to your childhood faith, come back to, these empty calories of thought ending cliches. And it's very tempting. And there were times where I'm like, am I like going crazy, because I want to come back to my faith, and I feel like I can't come back to that same childhood faith. And when religion is telling you that you should, and that you're wrong, and that you're feeling bad because you are leaving God, oh my God, I just had so much shame around all of that. And once I could undo the shame and realize that I was growing, it gave me enough courage to keep going in the face of family members telling me that I was crazy and that I was letting go of the iron rod.
Yeah. You talk about the fear of death, and you say something, but what it and I know it's saying this in some way. It it's sort of connected with me in this idea that religion sort of does this spiritual bypassing with death. It says, look, death isn't real.
Mhm.
Death isn't coming. There's a transition moment, but as long as you follow the prescribed path we've handed out, you get to skip having to worry about death, and you get to go immediately into some other sphere. where everything is beautiful. You can catch up with your friends there. So work here now, work for us now, and you can catch up with your loved ones later. Uh, give everything here to us now. You'll get it back tenfold then. And it sort of gives you, and I remember being a believing, active member of my faith and just not really worried about anything that was happening in the here and now. It's all just uh, it's all just school classes and credits to accumulate so that I can spend time in the hereafter with the people I care about. And what I now know is that I lost valuable years and decades with loved ones. Um, death, religion uses religion gives us it appeases. I think the word is you might even used was appease. It appeases death. I think it's important, and I want you to speak to how important it is that all of us on this side of things, we're going to have to wrestle with death
Hmm.
and sort of figure out what we think it means, and at least consider what we don't think it means if it might mean that still.
Yeah, so death is, if I were to go back and do, in fact, I'm gonna put this on a calendar that we're gonna podcast about this because it was so influential for me. I don't think we ever did a full podcast on terror management theory. Did we ever get into
Mm-mm,
that?
no. Mm-mm.
Okay, so I'm gonna come back because this is so important and we need to have a long conversation about it I don't have it anywhere else that I'd rather do that than here. So, uh, I really learned a lot with terror management theory, which are the studies about how much subconsciously we are working to avoid death because we got smart enough to realize that we were going to die. And maybe, religion really, its origins are being smart enough to realize that we're going to die and then making stories to make that okay so that we could still function and procreate. And the people who were most superstitious with those stories and believed it the most are the ones who kept procreating. And so we are the ancestors of those people, right? And so for death, the people who are most okay with death are the people who are on the opposite ends of the faith spectrum. So, like when you were talking about when you were really in and you didn't think about death very often, you can have that. Or if you're an atheist and you've made peace with death, fully faced it and made peace with death, you're also okay with death. If you're in the middle of those two spaces anywhere, death is going to be harder because you're not quite sure and you have to think about it. And everybody's in church saying grandma's in heaven now, and you're thinking, I'm not sure. That's when death tends to be the hardest, when the doubt starts to creep in and you're not fully sure that grandma's with Jesus. And so, for a lot of my clients, we actually have to go back and re-mourn people, or it's almost like being a newborn baby for the first time and realizing that you're going to die. But instead of kind of dealing with this slowly as a child as you develop, all of a sudden you have to deal with it when you're 40. Death wasn't the hardest of the existential fears for me to face, but I definitely still I had to cry and mourn that this ride ends. And I didn't have to do that as a Mormon, right? And so I did have to do that, and that was hard. And it's really hard. I mean, it's not just hard like doing homework is sometimes hard or whatever. It's hard in a way that like most my ancestors, maybe all of them, never had to face this hard. Never had to mourn that they're either going to watch all their friends and family die or their friends and family are going to watch them that this end rides. But like any fear, when we get closer to it, when we process it, when we mourn it, when we watch movies and art and music that gets us closer to it, it actually changes us. And so something that also happens with terror management theory studies is that when people have gone through the process of facing death, it changes you, makes you more present, makes you more willing to take risks into authenticity, makes you more close to your friends and family and loved ones. When you're on your deathbed, you live with less regret. So now I can say that death is a friend. And I have skulls around me. There's a skull pillow behind me. There's skulls all around me. It's one of my kind of just images that I like to have around me, or memento mori things that remind me of death, because something that's really magical to do when you're on the other side of facing it is to start your day on your deathbed where you're 90 and your body and brain and it's the end. but then you get to jump into my life at, what am I now, 38 years old, and my children are still young and they still really want to play with me. And oh my God, the sun is shining. I get to feel that on my skin. And oh my God, there's a hot shower. None of my ancestors ever got a hot shower, and it feels amazing. And starting your day on your deathbed at the beginning is terrifying, very hard. You're going to have to cry. But now it is one of the most fantastic ways. If I wake up on the wrong side of the bed, I will do this kind of guided meditation where I'm on my deathbed, and I jump into today, and I get to eat eggs and toast again, and I still have my taste buds, and it's delicious, and I love it, and it's so good, and I get to tell my partner that I love them. And it's a fantastic way to go through life, and it's what we call a philosopher's death, where you're so honest about what's actually going on here, that you actually walk kind of you walk mindfully towards death, where death is a friend. And it's scary and it's hard, but it's available to you on the other side of religion, and I think it's a great benefit.
Yeah.
Because both sides are dealing with death, the religious and the atheist, but only the atheist is getting that benefit that we missed when we were religious, that you talked about, of jumping into the pure magic of the present moment. You
Yeah.
get that more on the atheist side, not the religious side.
Yeah. I, like you, when there's certain moments, and this will sound so strange to people, but a death meditation is something I do often, and it's one of the most enjoyable it's not fun. I am thinking about my own end, and there are feelings of sadness and terror that take up those moments, and I sort of look forward to when they happen. And what happens is that generally I'll be sitting and watching television with my wife or with someone else, and we're watching TV, and somebody dies some sort of gruesome death. And then I immediately go inside my head and I go, okay, you're going to die someday. It could really suck. What does that feel like? Like, can you imagine what it feels like to be the person who just died this horrible death on the screen? Wow, that would be horrible. And then to sit with it for 5 or 10 minutes and just sort of go like, that's coming someday. And it could be that horrific. It could be more pleasant. Who knows? And like you said, the moment that meditation is over, I enter back into my present world, enjoying the universe around me, and I'm much more grateful and much more living the present moment to its fullest. It is worthy of our time to meditate upon death. And so I
Mhm.
really love that you shared that. You've got a section right after the fear of death. You talk about fear of freedom. And I think this might be off in the weeds a touch, but I want to tell you just a brief story,
Yeah.
because I think this will demonstrate how the system is broken. And I had something really traumatic happen within my friend group uh, within the last few months, and I obviously I won't share any names or anything, but friends of mine uh, decided to alter their consciousness. They're a couple. They decided to alter their consciousness with another couple. They are doing this in their backyard, and one of the four people have a psychotic experience on
Mm.
the substance, right? And they end up like the stories in their head are insane. It's not their normal self, and there's no blame for them because they're only doing what their brain tells them to do, otherwise they wouldn't have done it. But they end up outside of the house. They end up uh, causing a major disruption in society.
Mm.
So law enforcement comes, and law enforcement uh, throws this person to the ground, is really rough with them, hauls them away. Then law enforcement, because of what this situation looked like, law enforcement shows up at the home and with the remaining three people. And they end up in lots of trouble, more
Mm.
trouble than I would ever want to be in my entire life.
Mm.
And it strikes me that if we lived 100,000 years ago, our community of people, a healthy community of people, encourages all of us in the system to have altered consciousness experiences. And we all collectively understand that while it's going to be a hugely beneficial, positive experience for most of us, some of us are going to have negative experiences, and some of us are going to have anomaly psychotic experiences. And rather than call the enforcers in that system, rather than call the warriors in to beat the person up because they had some psychotic experience, rather than call the warriors in to go punish the rest of the tribe who was enjoying an altered consciousness experience, we would have had we would have had the right people, the shamans or the helpers, who would have put an arm around the person having an anomaly experience and said, "Oh, you're having an experience different than what most people have. Let's take you over to this space and give you a really safe place to live out this altered consciousness experience." No one should have been punished for that. No one should have been terrorized for that. And no one should have suffered innumerably for that. But because of either fear of freedom or fear of other people's freedom, we built a system so that we all can have a dependable amount of safety and confidence in our safety. Does that make sense? And
Mhm.
and so we build a system because we gave up all the risk of living as a tribe and we moved into a modern, agriculture first and now a modern industrial society. We've decided that there is a baseline amount of comfort that all the citizens have to enjoy, and anyone who has not is not hurting anyone else, but because their experience made us really uncomfortable, we punish it. And I just want to note that fear of freedom plays out in lots of ways, but society's fear of individual freedom causes the system to build rules that punish for what should have been safe spaces for people to explore their inner and outer world. Do you have any thoughts at all as I share that story?
Yeah, first of all, I'm really sad that that happened, and
Yeah.
it's something that's real, and it is an anomaly, but one that's really sad when that happens, when we start to mess with our brains. Because I just had such an opposite experience with psychedelics, where I felt like, in those worst times that I talked about before, it was psychedelics that gave me um some processing and some language for what I was going through, and some insight, and also help with depression. I mean, it was really instrumental for my path back, and so it's really hard to hear of the times when it's not. The interesting thing for me is that this issue of how and why and how willing we are able to give up our freedom, we've been talking about for thousands of years. So when you look at something like Plato's Cave, which I read when I was like 17, and thought that at the time, that I was, we all think that we're not the ones chained to the wall looking at shadows, and we always are, but we never think we are. And in that allegory, there are people that are chained, and they're just looking at shadows on the wall, and they really think that it's real. And if you come and you say, "I'm here to free you, I'm going to free you of your chains," they'll fight against you, and they'll say, "Absolutely not, like, this is real." And then you can keep kind of going further and further out of the cave into the light, uh whatever you want to call the light, where you're able to see illusions, you're seeing biases, you're seeing a little bit closer to how things are. And at any stage, I would have thought that I'm finally climbing closer to the light. And then when I look back, I always think, oh no, I was far more chained than I realized at the time, with whatever biases and identity was still going on with me at the time. And it seems to be an aspect of human nature. And sometimes in the ex-religious space, we talk as if Mormonism is, or any ism or any institution, they are the ones chaining us, when in reality, when you get down into human psyche, we are asking to be chained.
Yeah.
And that's a different conversation, because you can't just blame authority for that. Because the reality is that if all gurus and leaders and institutional leaders, if they all died tomorrow, we would recreate them the next day. They would be recreated the next day. We would say, where is someone to guide us? And when we start to mess with religions and gods, then we are very susceptible to Trump type characters, where the image of confidence comes off as competence, and we're really susceptible to that. So this is a deeply human problem, that life is so chaotic and we have so much anxiety, and making choices that actually affect your life. Should I take this job, or that should I take this job? And you don't know which one is going to f up your life. I mean, all of it's scary to be a human. It's hard to be a human. And so the reality is that yes, maybe as an institution Mormonism has some chains, but the reality is that on some level humans ask for it until you realize that you're chained and you break the chains, that
Mm.
you want that because you want someone to tell you, this is how you should live your life and then you'll be okay. This is how you should do your life and then you'll be with your children. And you say, thank God someone gave me a to-do list so I know how to do my life, because it's really fucking scary out there. So that fear, again, wasn't one of the ones that I wrestled with the most. The fear of meaninglessness was much more hard for me, because I have, like you, I have a little bit of a rebellious nature, and so that one wasn't as scary for me. But it can be someone's, deep existential fear, the fear of having to make choices for your own life.
Yeah, and there are ways in which society sets rules and standards based on the collective fear of freedom,
Mm, mhm.
right?
Yes, yes.
There's a there's a quote on page 52, and I've got one more page after this one, and then we'll just sort of run through the chapter headings, and I wanna talk for a moment about each of the topics you cover extremely briefly, but, uh, we're nearing towards the end, and I just wanna say, folks, I'm touching 1.5% of what's in this book. There's no way that we're gonna be able to do this book justice, in an hour and a half, 2-hour interview. So, on the bottom of page 52, you say, "The shadow side of religion is they have this habit of taking these good tools and creating some form of exclusivity. Before long, they will say this ritual is the only ritual that will get you into heaven. Or because our rituals cause these positive effects, it means our story or our God is true. Humans like to make clubhouses around things. What happens is these rituals ossify over time. They get stagnant. And maybe the words or the songs that are said no longer hold meaning. Some people leave the pews, but then leave behind these centuries of helpful rituals, which can be incredibly disorienting." And you and I have talked about this so many times on the podcast,
Mhm.
where we recognize, like, yes, the religion's hurting people and the religion has grown stale, or we've, as a collective species, have woken up enough that these now we can even see clearly that these rituals or these stories are hurting us. And so we want to discard them. There's a harder work that needs to be done. And again, we've spoke about it numerous times, which is we got to figure out how we maintain, because so much of it's already lost. Like, whatever things about Christianity or Islam have changed in the last 200 years, the Jewish faith has itself discarded so much of the Old Testament, right? It doesn't play by all those rules either. Um, some of them are good things to discard, most of them maybe are, but there's underlying things beneath the specifics of these rituals and these laws and these teachings that are designed to have us work together, to collaborate, to trust each other, and to behave towards each other, to be kind towards each other. And as we discard so much of this stuff, we're losing something too. We can see that we're becoming a world that, even in the midst of valuing individuality, valuing individual freedom, we sort of can sense the sadness and depression in a people that are becoming so disconnected, even as they can talk to just almost anyone in the world, and look at them on a screen. There, we all, at least you and I and those folks in the space recognize that we've got to find some value, recognize the unhealthy part of the thing that we're looking to discard, but also take a minute to sit with what it is we're discarding and realize what is the societal benefit of that mechanism as well, and find a way to incorporate that going forward, even if we're going to discard a thing that we agree causes harm and trauma, uh, that chains people up. Um, Maybe speak for a moment about that sort of wrestle and the time it takes, and uh, the constant kind of digging into it and thinking about it and taking these pieces and parts apart and examining them closely to see what the benefit is that they hold.
Yeah, I think this is where it's helpful to dig into the root of a lot of these religions, and it's something that we've talked about before, that there seems to be a mystic river or a mystic thread that sometimes will start a religion, and then in very short amount of time, within a few years, it becomes a clubhouse, and it's doing all kinds of things that are problematic. But at the root of it, there seems to be something real. I'm still unsure on some things about Joseph Smith, but I hold it as a possibility that he went into a forest and had an experience. Now, do I think that, of all the changing stories and how he used it, do I think that there's some real theology there? I don't. Is it possible that he had something of a mystical experience when you read the first account? It's possible. Is it possible that Muhammad had an experience? Is that possible that Jesus was an actual mystic, homeless mystic teacher like a Buddha? All of these things, I mean, it really is possible that these people were touching down on something real. And then, of course, the religions that we create in their name or around it become all the problems that humans will do in groups and in religions. And so uh, there was one time where I was in a group discussion here in Boise where we will gather to talk about these things, and there was a couple there that came in and said Mormonism is all bad. It's all bad. Religion is all bad. There's nothing that religion does except for evil and bad. And I went home that day and told my husband that I had defended Mormonism for the past 2 hours. And he's like, "Really?" Because I was pretty out by then. And it was a surprise to him and a surprise to me too. But it's because I just don't think that that's true. I don't think that all religion and the root of religion, especially that mystical side of religion where people are having these transcendent of ego experiences, of these deep connection to outside of themselves. These are real experiences that you can have in religion, in life, in nature, with psychedelics. These are real experiences that really do change people, and a lot of times in very positive ways and in ways that improve our well-being. And so to the people who say, that all religion is bad, I just don't see it that way. I do think that there's a baby in this bathwater, and you and I have for a long time been trying to rescue that baby, because we know what it's like to have tools and rituals. I know what it's like to have a community and have rituals and have awe and transcendence and education and friends. I know what it's like as a Mormon to have all these things. Now, I can't do that authentically in Mormonism because I don't believe it and there's all these problems. But there's something there worth trying to create in your own life for your own well-being. Not because the universe cares, not because you have to, but because these tools really do make life better. And there's a reason why religion exists. There's a reason why we co-evolved with religion. It's because there are tools here. There is something here that's worth exploring, just even for your own mental well-being.
Yeah. You have a chapter, Awakening the Feminine. And my first thought, not that I thought it, my thought was about what others would think. And when you have a chapter called Awakening the Feminine, it feels like you're writing a book for women, right? And I clearly know that that's not the case. You make a comment in here that I just think is I know that no idea is original, but you really make just a brilliant observation here. Eventually, male deities even took over the act of creation itself. And I just want to note, forever, women have carried the human species in their belly and have delivered that child at excruciating pain in order to bring life into the world. And we men, you pointed out in the beginning of the chapter that men have written the religious stories for men to read them, for men to be the interpreters of them. And women have sort of been sidelined. Not that they can't be an active participant, but um, it's not they're less privileged in these stories and less privileged in the process than men are. And men came along and took the feminine, which carries life and delivers life and goes through the turmoil that it takes to bring life into the world. And then men ended up just saying, we don't need that. Get out of here. Off with you. We're going to make ourselves the creators. We'll let men be the creators. And you observe it. You say eventually the male deities even took over the act of creation itself, single handedly creating the world and everything in it, discounting the entire class of women who put their bodies on altars to create life right in front of us. It's almost strange to think about a singular man creating life itself without the woman. Women now came from man instead of man coming from the womb of a woman. And you couldn't be more right. I, when I'm in conversations with my friends and we're talking about the problems of the world, my shtick that I go through in the last, say, 6 months is I tell my friends, men have been in charge of this world long enough. What do you say we just all collectively agree to let women be in charge for 1,000 years? And I know you'll note that that will have its own flaws and negative benefits to it. But seeing all the masculine ego in the world and how it operates and what it does and the ills that come from it, war and famine and all the things that go along with that, it feels like it'd be a safe bet to go, you know what? Let's try an experiment. Men have been in charge forever. Let's give females 1,000 years. Let's let a stronger degree of feminine energy rule the human species, and let's just see what happens. Um, and I really think that it couldn't be any worse than men writing and carrying out the story.
I have a lot of thoughts here. So I actually finished the book without this chapter and,
Mm,
actually went
interesting.
back and said, I because there is a fear that when men come upon this chapter, they'll say, "Here we go, gender wars. Let's jump on the men and hate on the men." And that's the usual response that I get on social media. It's the usual response that you get. But I just felt like spirituality was not complete without the female voice because it does add something different. And when you talk about women ruling or matriarchy, a lot of people think, yeah, if we put all the women in charge, then we get the problems. There's a shadow side to the feminine, just like there's a shadow side to the masculine. We're just going to get either the same problems or just different problems. Or how is it any better if women rule and shame men for being men than men ruling? And isn't it just the same thing? Why can't we all just work together? And what people don't realize is that matriarchy was communal. Matriarchy was not flipped patriarchy. It was not a woman in charge and there was one sole woman god and nothing else exists except worshiping that thing. When we talk about matriarchy before agriculture, there were pantheon of gods. Matriarchy was communal. Women were at the center of kind of the society socially, but men were included and involved and valued for their gifts, their spiritual gifts, their athletic gifts, whatever gifts they had for the tribe, they were valued. And so when men say that, why do we want matriarchy? Why can't I just be valued for who I am? That's what matriarchy was. That's what mothering is. It's being a mother to both men and women. And so the annoying thing is that we hear men every day say that there's an epidemic of male loneliness and we see male suicide rates. And then we say, actually, community and women really being a part of community because they have really something unique to offer as far as healing and empathy and presence and all of these and nurturing. Having a woman in your life gives you 10 more years as a man, longevity wise and health wise. It actually you'll lose years as a woman to have men in your life. And so there's so much there that is to offer. And so when men say, I don't want matriarchy because then I'll just be shamed, what they don't realize is we're trying to help you. You're lonely and you feel like you're stuck in a rat race and you feel like the only value you have is how much money you make and you're miserable at it. I'm not trying to shame you for being a man. I'm not trying to shame you for being born with a penis. There are gifts that you have to offer that are more than just what you make. It's matriarchy that historically has done that. And so then people will say, well, then why don't we have matriarchy if it is so much better for everyone? And we do have studies, especially with indigenous societies that are still matriarchal today, that the depression is low, crime is low, suicide is almost nothing, that it really is better for your well-being. The problem is patriarchy produces more, and it probably always will. It produces, when you can control female reproduction, when you can ramp up dogma and have a hierarchy, you produce more resources and you win the wars. And that is true across the world. There's not a single indigenous society that survived untouched from colonialism. So the reality is, yes, living communally and having women really be a pretty big player in that space as far as holding kind of the social bonds of the group really helps everyone, including men. Um, but the problem is it does produce less resources, and if you're going to go up to battle against a patriarchy, you're going to lose. And that's kind of the actual problem that we're in. And so for me, do I have a ton of hope that I'll read some things that some church or some movement is going to take over the world? I'm not sure if that's possible, but what I can say is that in my own life I can change things. And since I've left the Almost Awakened podcast to start doing my own content, I would say the biggest journey or the biggest change that I've had since then is still uncovering internalized patriarchy. And I thought a decade ago that I had deconstructed patriarchy by leaving Mormonism. And the reality is, so much still of what we define as spiritual is defined by men who don't wake up every day to tend to the people around them and adjust to the people around them. So I think, when I look at our podcast from 2 years ago, I would say one of the biggest changes that I've made is I think back then I was still focusing on things I can do to live a spiritual life. And I still was a little bit caught up in meditating, looking a certain way, and I'm going to do ice baths, and I'm going to go on retreat, and I'm going to do psychedelics every 6 months, and I'm going to and there was still kind of a regimented doing aspect of it. And it wasn't until I continued the feminine journey and really dug into feminine spirituality that I saw a totally different way of being spiritual. So the example that I give in the book is why is it that we value a man doing a loving kindness meditation, imagining loving things, and we call that spiritual. But when a woman is preparing a birthday party for her child, we've a little bit begun to call that emotional labor. We haven't even begun to call that spiritual. And yet that is love in motion. That is love in action. She's been thinking for weeks about what color does she want? What's the friend drama, and how, what friends are going to be invited? And my daughter had an octopus birthday, and I had to find octopus crafts so that she could feel very valued and loved on that day. And I would say 2 or 3 years ago, I still wouldn't have felt that preparing for a birthday party was spiritual. So one of the biggest shifts from then to today is that I don't feel different being on retreat or being at the gym or watching TV or listening to a spiritual podcast or going on retreat or doing a sound bath. All these things in the past, they used to be like, oh, this is my gym. This is my physical life. This is my spiritual life. These are the things that I do for my spiritual life. Now it feels like it's just life and it's all spiritual. And there's no difference between a sound bath and chores. There's no difference between a silent meditation retreat and doing the dishes. And that's a shift that has taken me a long time to really continue to challenge the internalized patriarchy on how we're even defining what is spiritual. And if spirituality is just being awake and its awareness and its connection, you can have that embedded into your life as a woman in ways that men may not recognize. So a man may look at my life and say, she's just a white, basic girl running errands and playing on TikTok and, going out to girl dinner and doing the dishes at night. And there's nothing particularly spiritual about her life. I don't see anything here of value. And for me, inside that life, I was awake every second of that day. and I was connected every second of that day. And I had 10 moments of deep awe and gratitude that bring me to tears. And I didn't notice that a few years ago. So I've still been growing on that journey. And it's so hard that I'm still unpacking patriarchy. But I couldn't publish the book until I added that, because it didn't just help me, it also helps men. So for my husband, for example, he is a triathlete. Literally tomorrow, I'm on my way to Texas for his first full Ironman, not half Ironman. And when I was sharing this stuff with him, he began to realize that his triathlon training is his spiritual practice, and going to a triathlon with his entrepreneurial Enneagram 3 type people like him, it's his pilgrimage. And that finish line is one of the most sacred temples. If you ever want a sacred temple of human emotion, a finish line of a race where they're hugging their family members is one of the most amazing places in the world. And so we got more intentional about what is it that gives me awe, and how can support me in that, and then what is that for him and how can I support him in that. And it's not scripture reading or prayer for either of us, but it is so much more meaningful for both of us. And so the feminine aspect of embodied spirituality blessed him too, because he gave up also what he should do in order to dive into what actually fills his cup and what actually helps him. And for him, it's body things. It's daily exercise that is his spiritual practice. So that chapter, I know it looks scary because I'm saying feminine and then it's all gender wars, but it really, I hope I pulled it off, that it's an inviting chapter, that spirituality, when we add more voices, when we add female voices to the conversation, it helps everyone.
It was my favorite chapter of the book. So, um, in order to do this interview, I picked basically one thing from each of the first 6 chapters. I'm saying this for the audience. There are 14 chapters total. You couldn't even fathom that I didn't even scratch the surface of this book. Um, I've really enjoyed watching you grow for the last decade. And again, on the front end, it was sort of a conversation a year or so. And then over the last 5 years or so, it's been pretty regular. And then the last few years, podcasting with you and watching. You did most of the prep for the shows. You picked a lot of the topics. You did most of the work to get the ideas in front of an audience. And I've really been in awe. Talking about awe, I've been in awe of you. What an amazing book. I want to just share with the audience. Chapter 1, you tell a little bit about your story, but as you pointed out in another interview, you didn't want this to be autobiographical. So you give a little bit, just enough so that we sort of know as an audience, as a reader, where you're coming from. But then chapter 2, you define and explain what secular spirituality is. Then you've got chapter 3, order and chaos. Chapter 4, rituals and calendars. Chapter 5, awe and contemplation. Chapter 6, awakening the feminine. And we didn't even get into the rest of these. Chapter 7, meaning and purpose. Chapter 8, secular morality. Chapter 9, intuition and the occult. Chapter 10, mysticism and wisdom traditions. Chapter 11, community and love. Chapter 12, sacred story. Chapter 13, human flourishing. And then the final chapter, chapter 14, the future of spirituality. And I will say, as I wrap up my side of this interview, I want to get your closing thoughts and we'll tell people where they can get the book. But chapter 14, when I saw the heading, the future of spirituality, I messaged you sort of this morning, but I think the future of spirituality is Brittany Hartley. And you have this you're this post Mormon voice in some regards to me, but that's not this book at all. Like you have created more than a niche space for yourself to be able to share your ideas, to influence the world and make it better, and to have a profound voice of wisdom. No nonsense spirituality, all the tools, no faith required. One of, again, I haven't quite finished it yet. I scoured it to try to find some things that we could talk about. I have about half the book still to read. I'm going to sit down and read it from cover to cover. Um, I was thinking this too today when I was preparing for today's interview. I know I'm rambling a bunch, but I thought I'm going to put an episode out where I give people sort of a tool bag. Okay, you're entering deconstruction. Here's some books. Janet Hagberg and Robert Gulich, The Critical Journey, Faith Beyond Belief with Margaret Placentra Johnson. Um, uh, oh man, there's so many of them. But to put a list of those together, because as I was reading this, I was like, this book is part of the puzzle. This is one of the books that people need to have on their short list of 5 or 6 books so that they can go from the beginning of deconstruction to the end of building a vibrant, confident individual life that values community, the inner world, the outer world. And I think this is the concluding book in how to help people do all of this stuff. I think you put a masterpiece together, Britt Hartley, and I just want to say it was an honor and a pleasure to read your book.
Thank you so much, Bill, and you are more a part of this process than I think even you realize. So thank you for your support along the way, and for those listening, if you've appreciated what Bill's done for you too, over the years as he's so vulnerably shared his story and everything that he's learning. Please support the podcast. I've dedicated that some portion of my sales go to the Mormon Discussion Podcast. I've already been able to make one donation, and I hope to be able to make more, because that is part of the equation too. If Mormonism and other such religions get all of the money and all of the resources and all of the people, then we don't have a chance of making spirituality better for people, because just numbers wise, we're not going to stand a chance, because then I'm going to have to go back to scooping ice cream, and Bill's going to have to go back to laying carpet and all, and we'll lose the tools that we've been finding along the way that genuinely do help people. So I hope people hear this, and I do hope you buy the book, because I do hope that it's helpful for people. It's the book, as Bill said, it's the book that I would have needed at various stages in my journey. But I also hope that everybody listening supports Mormon Discussion Podcast, and that's also part of how we change the world and increase the voices in people that are healthier than what's currently on offer when it comes to getting tools for how to deal with life. So I'm going to challenge you to listening to do that too.
Where can people find the book? I assume it's on Amazon.
So it's on Amazon, and there's a Kindle version and a paperback version. I've had a lot of requests for an audiobook, so I'm going to make it my summer project to figure out how to do that. So if you only do audiobooks, I will try by the fall to have something for you. And then I also have, courses on my website and coaching and other resources that you can check out. And there's one last thing that I want to say. It's something that I said this morning with a client that she said was really helpful for her, that I just kind of feel inspired to share, is that some people will look at me and think, oh, she's very well spoken about these topics or something like that, and I could never. And I want people to know that this book, or being able to do this, is because I took these tools, that I was just a nobody with no experience, just listening to Mormon Discussions podcast 10 years ago. And that's all that I was doing. I didn't have any expertise or education in anything. I was just a Mormon stay-at-home mom then. That's really all that I was. And this book is because I was in that dark place and said, what would actually be a life that I would love to experience? God, I love listening to Mormon Discussions podcasts. It would be amazing if I could sit around with Bill and have conversations like this. If I could continue to read and listen to podcasts and get some education and be able to have conversations where we get to talk about these things, because we love it. I love it. If there was a comet that was going to hit the earth, we would just keep talking, because I'm just having so much fun. And so for me, like, I've had my imposter syndrome come up. I've had my shadow come up for about the past 2 weeks. And I haven't shared this to anyone else. I haven't shared this publicly, but for about 2 weeks, I've had dreams and fears that someone's going to write an expose and they're gonna realize all the not spiritual things that I do and all the stupid shit that I've said along the way. And that I don't know, I sometimes buy meat that is factory farmed and I'm such a hypocrite, and I've had this fear that like I'm going to be outed and they're all going to realize that I don't deserve to be here and I don't deserve to be a part of this conversation because I'm not smart enough and I'm not good enough and I'm not spiritual enough, and I yelled at my kids and someone's going to write an expose and they're all going to find out. And I've had to battle my own shadow, not battle, but like meet my own shadow and my own imposter syndrome. And I'm not different really than anyone else. It's just that I was in that dark place where I wanted to die, and I got and the benefit of that, if you are in that place, is that it forces you to be brave and take risks into what is a life worth living. So when you see me on this side of things now, you may think, oh, she has an education and she's talking in her field and she's probably really great. Like I've had nightmares for weeks about the publish of this book, and I was just a listener to Mormon discussions a decade ago, knowing nothing about any of this. But when you really start to laser focus, like Bill was talking about with the death meditation, when you laser focus on what you want to spend your life doing, your life gets so much better. And this book would have helped me, and so I hope that it helps you. And Mormon discussion has been an important part of the process. So I'm not anything special, but good things happen when you get intentional and gather tools for your life that's worth living. And I hope that that helps
Love it.
others.
You undoubtedly, there's no doubt in my mind as I read through the book that you have put more than your 10,000 hours in to
I do think I've put my
yeah,
10,000 hours in. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
to be an expert at explaining to people post deconstruction what it is that takes what it takes to put uh, a well-rounded, happy, developed second half of life together, and how we can recognize the ills of religion without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The uh, the quotes in the back from various people who spoke highly of your work. Many of these were folks that we had on the podcast that we interviewed. That
Nope, you're wrong. All of them were people who have been on
yeah,
the podcast. There's not a single person on that list that I didn't know because of
yeah,
our connection through the podcast. Nick Jankel, Thomas Ord, Jim Palmer, John Ogden, Bart Campolo, and David Hayward were some of our biggest guests that we had on Almost
and
Awakened. So they have all been
those
on
are
our
all such big
podcast.
name. You really hit it out of the park, folks. If you don't have or get that to be on your shelf, by the way, the cover is also gorgeous. Um, it's very fitting. I just want to say thank you for your time today, Britt. And I think this book, you said it somewhere else, that this book will be deeply, you think this book will be deeply helpful. I can tell you this book will be deeply helpful. As one who is, I think, fairly safe in this space, the book was helpful to
Mhm.
me. Um, good job. Kudos to you. And I am honored to be your friend. Appreciate you so much. And thank you for your time today.
I love it, Bill. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Take
so
it easy,
much.
everybody. See you next time.
Bye.